Should I go? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this very first city directed funding opportunities. Wow, this is a mouthful. Letter of interest process information center session, and we are so grateful to have each and every one of you here with us today and with us together in this work. We all are playing unique roles in the process, both internally at the city, at the county, and also with each of you and the missions of your organization. And so it is a great privilege to be working with each of you and each of your organizations to serve our community together. So my role here this morning is to introduce our team. I am Rebecca Geiser. I'm the Deputy Director of Health, Housing, and Community Development in the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. We have a couple of other CPED, as we call it, staff in the back. Our director, Chris Dels, and our staff assistant, Jack Fowler, are here with us today as well, although they won't be presenting.
Rebecca, very quickly, I know most of you, but for anyone I have not met, thank you so much for being here. My name is Chris. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development. The Community Development Team, which primarily manages our federal grant programs, is one key part of the department. We have other bureaus within the department as well. Happy to talk about that at another time, but we're really focused on these community development opportunities for today. And I'm here mostly to be a spectator, here for moral support, and thank you so much to the team for putting this together. I'm very excited that this is an opportunity, hopefully, to be more efficient with your resources, be more customer friendly and efficient on your side, and also for us as well, because we all have too much to do. I know that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome, Jack, as well. So here at the table presenting today, we have Jen Orantes. She's the Fund Development Manager for Admin Services. We have Elise Poi. She is our Program Administrator. And Bryn McGowan is our Community Development Administrator and CPED, and we'll go over a little bit about the roles and responsibilities. I think that'll become clearer as we go along and as each person presents. Tina Campbell is our Director of Administrative Services. She will also be joining us for the RACP portion of this presentation, so she'll be here in just a little bit as well. And thank you to Michaela. This is Michaela Allwine. She's the Director of Housing and Community Development with the Lancaster County Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And we are just so thrilled about our growing and strengthening partnership with the County Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We have lots of irons in the fire, and we are streamlining and our processes together to make things, as Chris said, easier for you and easier for us, and avoid duplication. So we're so glad Michaela's here. And also between City Administrative Services and City Community Planning and Economic Development, we are also working at streamlining our processes to make it easier for you. So it's very likely that you have interacted with multiple people from our team, and we're hoping to make that a little bit clearer. And this is Tina, who is, I just mentioned a minute ago, our Director of Administrative Services. So thank you again for your interest. Hope to answer all of your questions about this process and about our city directed funding opportunities this year. So I will turn it over to Bryn. Thank you all for being here and for preparing the presentation.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Bryn McGowan. I am a Community Development Administrator with the city, and we're really excited to share with you more about our 2024 Letter of Interest process with you today. This is the first time we're implementing something like this as a city, so we appreciate your patience and understanding as we work through and identify any redundancies, and confusing verbiage and inefficiencies in our rollout of this, but our ultimate goal and hope is that we're able to improve your workflows and organizational capacity to secure and manage grant funding through implementing this process annually. So today's information session will follow the following agenda. First, we will provide an overview of our LOI process to include discussing the purpose and goals, reviewing the LOI submittal procedures, explaining the content we want to see in your LOI response, presenting the timeline for the full LOI process, and explaining how we will assess and evaluate your LOI responses. Then we will move into reviewing the actual funding opportunities we project will be available to you in 2024 that either the city directly manages or we collaboratively work with partners to manage. After that, we will provide you with some more LOI support opportunities through the next month, and then close by opening the floor to any questions you might have. So firstly, we want to provide you with a bit of context as to why we're undertaking this LOI process and what we hope to achieve through it. So primarily, we envision this process as an opportunity for both information sharing and gathering, in that one, we can communicate out the different funding opportunities we project being available throughout the year for your organization to consider applying for and pursuing. And two, we can gather information about the important programs and projects that our community organizations are implementing to better understand your needs so we can lend support where appropriate. This process is also going to act as a mechanism where we can help match eligible funding with viable programs and projects through the available funding opportunities. So in that vein, and as a result of this process, we will provide technical guidance and recommendations to each organization who submits an LOI response. And through that, we hope to provide advice and guidance on the feasibility of your program and project, and make recommendations for you to consider pursuing opportunities based on program project eligibility and feasibility. And then we're also hoping to use this process to identify opportunities for further capacity building and technical assistance. So ultimately, our goal is to be able to better streamline application procedures and to more efficiently and proactively direct the limited resources we have access to meet our community needs. So for example, if there's an organization in our community who serves a vulnerable population and they're in need of building renovations, theoretically, they would submit an LOI response form through this process, and the city would then evaluate the response form for the renovation project and provide recommendations for them to apply to various appropriate funding opportunities, in addition to advice and guidance to help strengthen their technical and organizational capacity to secure funding. So now we will move on to an overview of the city's letter of interest process, which will be presented by Elise.
Okay, thank you, Bryn. So each organization will submit one LOI response form for each program or project. The city then will review and provide recommendations and/or approvals. Except for LSA funding, organizations are required to submit an LOI response. Keep in mind, organizations are responsible to apply for funding opportunities during the normal cycles. Next, we have our timeline. So the request for LOIs was released to our community partners on February 20th. We're currently in our information session, which is being live streamed. And additionally, we've arranged 2 virtual office hours for March 13th and March 20th, both from 10 to 11 a.m. And the deadline for submitting LOI responses is March 29th at 5 p.m. Then on April 30th, the city will then provide results of the evaluation and recommendations. So here's some contents in the LOI. Hold on one second. So in the content, there's an area for your organizational capacity and needs. You only need to submit this for one per organization. your program and project overview, your budget summary, your risk and grant compliance, and other program needs. Please note, not responding to this LOI does not preclude organizations from submitting applications for funding opportunities during the normal cycle, nor does it supersede the required application process. For the funding source you're pursuing, your organization might need to provide a more comprehensive LOI. The local shares account is an exception. Every organization interested in applying for city-supported LSA applications must submit an LOI response for evaluation and approval. This is for city LSA applications only, so other LSA opportunities will need to follow the process and procedure specific to their respective jurisdiction. And Jen will provide further details about LSA funding later in the presentation. So LOI responses are due March 29th at 5 p.m. and you could email your response form to Bryn, and I'll kick it back over to her to provide an overview of how the city will assess and evaluate the LOI processes.
Great. So the city plans to assess LOI responses based on the following criteria. 1, how well the program or project aligns with the available funding opportunities based on the appropriate eligibility criteria. 2, we're going to look at the viability of the program or project implementation timeline with the application and award procedures and cycles. 3, we're going to look at your demonstration of organizational capacity to successfully manage application processes. We're also going to look at the ability of the LOI respondent to meet grant requirements from a compliance perspective. And then we're also going to evaluate the overall level of program or project risk. So we're hoping to provide the results of this evaluation and our recommendations for pursuing appropriate funding opportunities and opportunities for technical assistance and strengthening to you directly via letters to each organization who is submitting LOI responses by April 30th. So next, we're going to move on to describe the specific funding sources that we anticipate will be accepting grant applications throughout 2024. We're going to provide you with a summary of the specific funding opportunity, the basic eligible activities, how you can apply for the funding, the anticipated application timeline, and the estimated funding we project to be available. Please be aware, though, that each of these funding sources have specific application procedures in addition to this LOI process and requirements that you will still need to follow should you decide to apply. Additionally, the application timelines and the available funding amounts are subject to change based on the processes of the ultimate awarding entity. So we encourage you to review the program web pages and guidelines provided in the resources so you can understand the process and proactively plan your funding applications. So this list is primarily provided for informational purposes and is not meant to really be exhaustive. There may be extraneous funding opportunities available that support your organizational needs that we're either not involved with directly or indirectly, or we're just not aware of. So the first funding source we're going to highlight is the Home Investment Partnership Program that we project will be available through the City-County Home Consortium process this year. So Michaela has graciously agreed to present that slide for us.
Hello. A lot of you have applied for home funding before, so I know that some of you have some insight to this as well, but our Home Investment Partnership, home funding for short, is really the single largest source that we get from federal entitlement to go towards the construction or rehabilitation of affordable housing in the county. We also have a home ARPA, which I'm not going to talk about today. That's a little bit more complicated and sort of subject to discretion of the city and the county on how to use it, but so I'm just talking about home today. So with home funding, we're looking at building, buying, rehabilitation for rental or home ownership. or it can be used as direct rental assistance, which we don't do quite as often. We typically are using this for rental or homeownership opportunities. Historically, this funding source has been kind of layered with the low-income housing tax credit for larger scale new construction. But in the past few years, we've sort of pivoted to open this funding up to construction projects that are not paired with low-income housing tax credit. So they can be either smaller in scale or scattered site. We've tried to be a little bit more creative with this funding since, again, this is the largest source of affordable housing funding that we do have. We typically do run this program in conjunction with the timeline of the low-income housing tax credit program, which is state-run. So whenever the state announces that those applications are due, we sort of backtracked 3 or so months in time, and that's when we run our home round. So that typically is happening mid to late summer. In past years, it's fluctuated a little bit because of the LIHTC rounds, but typically mid to late summer, you look for that application process. The city projects that they will have about $800,000 to allocate this year. I just put a little bit of information underneath for maximum subsidies. So the way that the subsidies are determined is there's a maximum subsidy per type of bedroom unit. So for just to look at this, studios with 0 bedrooms, the maximum subsidy is $173,011. That doesn't necessarily mean that each project gets up to the maximum subsidy, but that is the limit that we are able to give. We do have quite a lengthy process for the applications for home. We have to figure out through sort of complicated metrics how much each project can get. The city might decide that they set a cap on how much they allocate each program. It's sort of different each year depending on how much we have and depending on the outcome of the pipeline of projects. Great. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Michaela. So next up, we're going to talk about our available community development block grant funding this year. So the city and county both anticipate we will have community development block grant or CDBG entitlement funding available this year to support HUD-approved activities. So the city projects it's going to have CDBG dollars available to support our Affordable Housing Development Solutions Program. And this is includes eligible activities that are related to single-family rehab to support either home ownership or rental opportunities for low to moderate income residents. And you will be able to apply for this funding through the city-county affordable housing RFP process that coincides with the home process Michaela talked about, which we're projecting. I think our timelines move back a little bit based on the continuing resolutions that keep happening at the federal level. So we're projecting this is really going to kick off in Q3 or Q4 of 2024. But really that depends on the full fiscal year 2024 federal budget being passed. And we estimate that we're going to have around $150,000 in total CDBG funding available to support this activity this year.
So on the county level, there's a few different programs. I'm going to focus on the public improvements program today that we also use CDBG for, that projects that lie within the city can apply for. So our public improvements program works with facilities that serve low and moderate income populations and are publicly accessible. So this could be something like a building that houses social services or food access or community programs that are publicly accessible. There's no specific criteria. There's no, religious criteria or age determined. It can be publicly accessible to anyone. We're about to open that round of funding in March 12th, and the LOIs will be due April 9th. The applications are then due the 28th. So between April 9th and May 28th, you can work with our staff to provide technical assistance on the application and really go through the project proposal to make sure that, this funding is really part of the larger stack because we are able to give up to $200,000 in grant per project. We have about $1 million per year, more or less. Some of that money does go towards municipal projects, so it doesn't necessarily mean we have $1 million worth of projects to just give to public facilities. But again, it really depends on the pipeline of projects that we do get applications for. So because of the timeline on that one, I'm happy to answer any questions or connect you after the meeting today with our program staff that can answer and assist you with that LOI process.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. So now we're going to hear from Jen, who's going to share a little bit more about the Neighborhood Assistance Program.
Thanks, Bryn. So I'm going to switch us over into funding that doesn't necessarily come through the city, but it's ways that we can support you or additional funding for the projects that you need. So first one is NAP. So I do want to make sure that this is for your awareness. So it's nothing that the city can apply for on your behalf. You need to apply for as an organization, but it is another funding opportunity when it comes to some of the projects I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The city can support when it comes to letters of support, or we can speak to organizations on your behalf or with you, but hopefully through this LOI process we can kind of figure out ahead of time what we can do and how we can support you best. I want to make another note of the fact that you have to be a 501c3 to apply. If that is not the case for the city, for example, we're not a 501c3, but we partner with one, and that's how we can apply for NAP funding. So this program is ideal for banks and for-profit entities. So what happens is that it's a tax entitlement program. They pledge a certain amount to you as an organization, and in return, they receive tax credits on their end. So you are entitled to that funding. You receive that funding up front, basically, and then on the back end, once that year is done, they receive tax credits on their end. And I'll talk about a little bit of the process after I go through each of these tracks. So there's 4 different tracks that you can apply for when it comes to NAP. One is just NAP in general. It's it's the broadest one. This one is up to 55% in tax credits. It primarily addresses neighborhood and community issues in low-income areas and distressed areas. So examples would be affordable housing, education, job training, crime prevention, that type of work. This is a 1-year commitment, as most of them are. NPP is the only one that is not. Moving on to MPP, this is up to 75 to 80% back for tax credits. It's a minimum of 5 years and a minimum of $100,000 per year. So each contributor has at least $50,000 that they need to put in each year. The project minimum, again, is $100,000. For the projects that are 5 years, they are eligible for 75% tax credits. For projects over 5 years, I've seen anywhere from like 6 to 7. Those are up to 80% tax credits. So NPP is for larger scale projects that are going to move beyond that 1-year time frame. SPP is 75% tax credit back. So this one is a little bit different, where it must demonstrate significant impact on a specific area. So examples would be economic development, economic recovery, weatherization, housing rehabilitation, mortgage foreclosure, prevention, blight elimination, and this is also a 1-year program. And then CFP is specific for food banks. So food banks, pantries, other emergency food providers are eligible for this. Not everyone is. It's a 1-year commitment, and donations can be cash or in kind. And I think I said it was 55%. I think it's also on the screen. So the timeline for this, in my experience, in just going out and speaking to banks and potential partners, it's best to start in January. So at the end of this year, ideally, you would start preparing with your team as to what you would like to fund through NAP funding. January through March is the best time, especially when it comes to banks, to approach them to be partners in this project. So once that happens, once you have those conversations, you secure about 5 of them, right? They then need to secure that contribution through a letter. And there is a template provided in the guidelines. Once that's done, then the application process happens. Project happens, dollars are then done at the end once the project is completed. There is no limit to the amount that's secured for this, so it really is dependent on your project. And I do also want to note that I think, especially with a community this small, there is this idea that we're competing for dollars when it comes to NAP, and that's not the case. And I think through this LOI process too, what we want to do is make sure that we're best utilizing resources and your time. So if there are projects that we see that are kind of overlapping, we can then say, hey, there's two other organizations that are trying to do the same type of work. What would that look like for the community? What would that look like for the people you're trying to serve? And how can we best support you and what you need and your needs? So it's not necessarily competing for funds. It's just who you go after for that time frame and that year. Funders do also apply or support multiple projects, so it's not that they only do one. That's NAP. We'll have a section for questions later. I know I was really confused about the NAP process when I first did it. But I'm going to switch us over to LSA, which I think most everyone in the room should be aware of. So LSA funding, you've heard throughout the presentation that this one acts a little bit differently. Through this LOI process, what we're hoping to do is secure an idea of the projects that are coming up for your organizations so that we can best prepare for when it does open up. It is not open for 2024, at least not that we're aware of. So once we do hear that, we have a list of people that we will blast out the information to. I'm sure you're on those lists as well. And then through the sign-up sheet, we'll also be able to get that information to you. But LSA is state funding, and last year they had about $200 million allocated for these projects statewide. So I'm going to run you through a little bit about the project itself, timeline, and then a few other pieces. So the city needs to apply on your behalf, which is why we're trying to get to this ahead of time. So as an organization, you will be a sub-applicant in this process, and in the application itself, they will ask for your primary point of contact and our primary point of contact so that we're both involved in that process. What happens is if I do end up reaching out or connecting with someone on their end, I immediately bring your team into it because you guys are the experts in all of this. Eligible activities must be they're primarily for construction purposes and equipment purchases. And if you do plan to do any construction on properties, they must be owned and maintained by you, by the applicant. So how to apply? About 3 to 4 months ahead of time, we send you a document outlining the steps that we need because we are the applicant itself. We're going to need some of that cushion. So after that gets sent out, that also is including a few deadlines that you'll have to meet for us. And one is the most important one, which is trying to get a project description and amount for the project so that we can submit a resolution on your behalf. So resolutions, they really do, it's every month that they go through, so we're trying to get everyone ahead of time so we're not scrambling at the last minute. But once we write up the resolution, of course, we're going to share back and forth. It goes to council, and then that's where work on your application begins. So the city is going to submit by the time that we're given. Again, we're not sure of 2024 timeline yet. And then once we hear back, award letters are sent out. So for anyone who applied for the 2023 year, we're currently in that process where the analyst is reviewing applications now. So we'll probably hear back soon, but I haven't also been given a timeline for that yet either. I also want to note that there is a $100 application fee for this program, and matching funds are not required, which is nice. This program also lines up with RACP funding. So what we realized over the past few years is that because the maximum ask is $1 million and minimum is 25, I think it's on the slide, because it's $1 million, it's a pretty significant projects that you're working on. And most of the time, that's also going to align with other funding sources. So we can advocate on our behalf as a city for the type of project that you are submitting. And it also aligns, again, with RACP dollars and funding. So I'm going to pass it to Tina, and I'll give her a second to walk up here so she can go into the microphone. But yeah, we'll be able to work with you through both the NAP and LSA applications. And then Tina can talk a little bit about RACP, which Tina is the expert. It's going to be switching over to either me or CPED at some point. We'll figure it out and we'll communicate with everyone, but I'll pass it over to Tina.
All right, thanks. How many of you have worked with RACP? I know that a couple of you have. So you know this is a fairly time-intensive, complicated process. So I am just going to give a very brief overview of what RACP is today, but there's a lot more components involved in it. So RACP is, you can see it up here, it can be used for the design, acquisition, and construction of basically regional economic opportunities or improvements. So this is really what it states. It's for capital, it's for construction, it's for acquisition, it's not for programs. So you can't use the funding for programs or operational expenses. The cost of the project has to be over $1 million. So already the project needs to be a little bit bigger than some of the other projects. And the match is 1-to-1. And they talk about it being non-state financial participation, which means you can use federal funding as part of the match. Jen mentioned LSA funding. I think we can use that. I'm looking at the YW. We're still kind of trying to figure that out, but I'm pretty sure that can be used as part of the match too. So there are opportunities for other grant funds to be matched against this, but it can't be state grant funds. How to apply, I want to note that a little bit. Again, there's a lot of kind of logistical details with this. RACP has a flow chart just for the pre-application piece of RACP. So again, there's quite a few components with it. But the one thing that I'll mention is with RACP, which is different from the other grant sources, you actually have to have a line in the state's capital budget itemization projects line. So that means that this goes by the state budget and often will go by the state budget timeline. So what you would need to do with this, the first step is to actually contact state representatives, so either Sterla or Representative Smith-Wydell, to actually get a line item itemized for your project. Now they do have some that are general line items that they might be able to use, but that really comes through the representative's office first. So that's really the first step in this. Once that's confirmed, then there's a pre-application that you go through when you when it opens, and I will say often that is in late summer, early fall, but it really varies based on the state budget process. So this past year it was a little later because of the governor's transition. If there's a holdup in the state budget, it might be later. Sometimes they open 2 different cycles throughout a year, so it's really going to vary. So we have this up here, but we don't really know for sure when it's going to open. And the pre-application is a fairly simple process once you get the line item, itemized from the representatives. Once you get the award letter, though, then you actually do a full application, which is a bit more of it's a whole nother flow chart that they have that includes a lot of information. There's a lot of pieces with RACP that are requirements around bidding, procurement, some different buying requirements, including like U.S. Steel, that sort of thing. So we are actually really strongly recommending that you have a consultant that help you work through this if you're considering RACP funds. I know the Y has worked with the consultant. Have others worked with the consultant, or have you done it on your own? Yeah. Yeah, you're the consultant. Yeah, so I would say strongly recommend considering a consultant, but if you don't have a consultant, just know that it's going to take a huge amount of your staff time and capacity to be able to work through this. And then just finally, again, the minimum project is $1 million, which would mean that the minimum grant would be $500,000 because they require that match.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, great. So we know this is a lot of information to digest, so we're also going to have some additional support opportunities through the LOI process for you guys to join us. We're going to be hosting virtual office hours. That will be an opportunity for you to just join a call and ask us any outstanding questions that you have over the next 2 weeks as you are formulating your LOI responses. So the first session is going to be on March 13th from 10 to 11 a.m. And the second session is going to be on March 20th, also from 10 to 11 a.m. And you can request links to those sessions from me directly at the email on the screen. And my email is also in all of the different postings that are out there as well. So great. Now we're going to open the floor to any questions you guys might have about this process or any of the funding sources that are highlighted. I'm going to put the microphone up at the podium. I do ask that you ask your questions into the microphone so those joining us online can hear the questions.
Hi, thank you guys so much for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. The first one was about block grants. Can you apply for multiple block grants if you have, in the same cycle, if you have multiple projects that would qualify?
I assume you're talking about the community development block grant?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think you wouldn't be precluded from applying for multiple projects. There's no regulatory requirements for organizations to only apply once.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So question for Jen about the LSA, or actually sorry, I'm going through my notes, about the NAP program, the NAP program. How is this different than EITC? And is there a list of businesses that are participating that we can then reach out to?
Yeah, so this is similar to EITC, but it works in a different way. I think this one targets, I think EITC targets specifically education-based programs. This one targets more business development, workforce development, affordable housing.
Okay.
And I lost the question that you asked me, I'm sorry.
Just, is there a list of, so we participate in the EITC program,
Yeah.
and DCED gives us an Excel doc that basically says all of these people have applied, or are approved, all these businesses are approved, and this is their information, so that we can then reach out to those businesses and ask if they'll give to our organization. So I'm just wondering if there is the same kind of list for this.
Yeah, I think the best list and the best way to get a hold of that type of support is going through Lancaster City Alliance has a list of different banks that they've worked with that they've also shared. So I think I can share that with everyone. If not, sorry, Jeremy. But yeah, we can email that to you. And they are businesses and banks in the area that have at least participated in NAP before.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one more question. How does, for these various funding sources, are there requirements for prevailing wage?
Yeah, and almost all of them there are. And that's something that is also in all of the guidelines. So I think that's something that going into the project you should keep in mind. There are other pieces in there as well, but I think prevailing wage is probably across the board. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Different criteria for each program, though, just to make it a little bit easier for you to stack your funding sources. They're all, like some of them have, if you spend a certain amount of that funding source, it triggers. Some, like the home program, is if you're designating a certain number of units or more, it triggers prevailing wages. Some are federal, some are state prevailing wages, so they're all different, yeah. Sorry about that.
Darlene, I just want to ask a question about the home funds. You said there's like 800K. Is that the funds from last year that weren't spent, or is that going to be what's going to be allocated for this year?
So we haven't gotten our allocation yet because of the federal budget not being passed, but we will get additional funding allocated this year, and yes, some of them are rollover from last year.
So would it be more than 800K, I think is on this
Not
sheet?
necessarily.
I think we're estimating
Yeah.
it to be 800K with the rollover
With
from last
both
year.
from last
and
year
what-
and what they give this year?
If funding levels remain the same, we're estimating it to be a full 800K.
Yeah,
Okay.
home funding is slated to go down a little bit. But yeah, it kind of just depends on what the rollover sources are too. There's like programming, I mean, there's just like a different, lots of
Okay.
different places it comes from.
And the reason for not using home funds from last year, because I'm sure all these agencies probably have projects that could have used the money, but we're keeping it for this year, so.
So, yeah, I mean, just in working with the city on this, because we were using home ARPA last year also, so we have multiple projects that received home ARPA that are in the city, but then the amount of home dollars, regular home dollars, that were unallocated from last year didn't seem to be impactful enough on their own to go through all of the compliance regulations, so it was rolled over to this year to have a bigger impact. Instead of having piecemeal small amounts here and there, the amount last year was rolled over because home is pretty compliance heavy and also pretty labor intensive to administer and apply for, as you very well know. So, in order to have a larger impact all at one time as opposed to spreading it out, the decision was made to roll those funds over to this year. Yeah. That was accurate, right?
Hi, this is more of just a confirmation. So LSA funds cannot be used for acquisition. You must currently own the property and then need to do construction or purchase equipment on top of that.
Yeah, I think we were dealing with that this year as well. It has to be under it has to be, I think there's it must have been purchased like a year in advance, I think, for LSA. And again, that's in the guidelines. I don't have it immediately off the top of my head. But yeah, that's something that you cannot use it to do any acquisition.
Hi. Related to the the LSA process, do you know when organizations that applied in the past cycle will find out about their awards?
I don't. So I'm currently working with a couple of analysts that are coming back for the grants that were submitted. We're in March, so I'm thinking probably before June, hopefully, but we haven't been given a sense as to the timeline for that. Because they're already reviewing, I'm thinking and hoping that it's going to happen sooner rather than later, but I'll let you know if I hear anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mine's really quick. As far as the Rec Me program, is the dollar amount, matching amount, is it dollars or could it be in kind? Land or building?
So it can be land, it can be based on appraisals, that sort of thing. There's some in kind that could be done, but it really depends on the project. But yeah, that could be a part of it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Another RACP question. I was taking a look through the information for that, and I noticed they made a reference to if you receive a certain kind of federal or state funding that you're actually not eligible to apply for the RACP funding. Is that true?
Yes, but I don't know all of those details. So that would be something that we might need to ask at the Office of the Budget based on the specific funding sources. It's more state funding than it is federal, but I don't know those. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions burning in your brains? If not, thank you all again for taking time out of your day to come to our information session. Feel free to reach out to me directly with any additional questions you may have, or to join the office hours over the next 2 weeks. We look forward to reading your LOI responses and collaborating in the future.
Well, I think this is like it might be the same on the phone as well. Oh, that's right.
Is this? Oh, okay. All right. Well, this is my, it actually forward slash
So who are you with?
Actually, I'm with Thaddeus Stevens.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll work
Nice to meet
together.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I got a face with the name.
Yeah.
So
I
that
know
is
we do
good.
a little bit back and forth.
Yes.
The daughter. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
I know her from the science program.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, she's great.
Hi, Jenny Grimmett.
I'll
Thaddeus
tell her I
Yeah. And you are Hampshire City Housing Authority, Barb Wilson. I feel like we met at Jimmy Maxwell with Union Community Parent United Way. I think we met maybe at a housing homelessness meeting or something.
All the things. Yeah. It was really good to see you. It was nice to meet both of you.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes, yes.